Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. I never thought anything could shake the stable world David and I had built together. We had been married for several years, and everything was going as expected. Steadily, predictably, perhaps even too much so. But when Liam arrived, I immediately knew that this young man would change everything. David was so kind, always ready to help, that when his nephew decided to move to our city to study at the university, we didn't hesitate to invite him to stay with us temporarily. Liam, tall, athletic, and openly charismatic, entered our home like a fresh breeze, without knocking, but with the confidence that he was always welcome here. "Thanks, Uncle David," he said as he walked into the house with a backpack slung over his shoulder. "It's so generous of you. I really appreciate it." "Oh, come on, Liam," David smiled, giving him a pat on the shoulder. "Your family. Where else would you go?" Liam smirked slightly, then shifted his gaze to me. "Catherine, thank you for letting me intrude on your personal space." His tone was respectful, but there was something else in his eyes. I can't say what it was, but I felt it. "Don't be silly, Liam," I replied with a smile. "We're happy to have you living with us. I hope you'll like it here." He gave me a quick but sincere smile, and for a moment I looked away, feeling a slight tension. It was that awkward moment when you realize someone is looking at you differently than you're used to. But I quickly pushed the thought aside and focused on my tasks. Our home had always been a place where I felt comfortable, but with Liam's arrival, a new energy filled the air. He became an integral part of our dinners, conversations, and even our daily routines. And, to be honest, he livened up our evenings, which had previously been rather monotonous. One evening, when David was busy in his study, Liam walked into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "How can I help?" he asked, sitting on a stool by the island and watching as I chopped vegetables. "Nothing in particular," I replied without looking up. "I can manage." "Are you sure?" He tilted his head to the side, watching my movements with interest. "You don't want me just sitting here doing nothing, do you?" I smiled and shook my head slightly. "All right." I handed him a bowl of chopped vegetables. "Then mix this." He got up and moved closer. We stood side by side, and I felt the warmth of his body at a distance that seemed too close for comfort. But I quickly distracted myself, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. "You cook a lot," he said, stirring the vegetables. "I think you have a talent for it." "Well, after several years of marriage to a man who loves to eat, you learn quickly," I chuckled. "David's a lucky guy." He threw a brief glance at me, and for a moment, I felt something strange. It wasn't just a compliment. I didn't know what to do with it, so I decided to change the subject. "How's school? Have you gotten used to the pace yet?" I asked, trying to sound casual and lighthearted. "Yeah, it's going well," Liam nodded, continuing to stir the vegetables. "But honestly, I'm still getting used to the city. It's so different from where I lived before." "I think it's just a matter of time," I replied, turning to him, "like everything in life." He paused for a moment and then added, "You're right, but sometimes changes happen faster than you expect." I stopped for a moment, hearing those words. They sounded as if they were directed at me personally. I felt the tension between us. Liam continued to look at me, but this time his gaze was more scrutinizing, almost piercing. "Dinner's almost ready." I quickly ended the conversation, feeling that the moment had stretched too long. Liam nodded and smirked again, as if agreeing with my attempt to avoid the subject. He returned to the table, and for a while, everything seemed to return to normal. But inside, I already knew. That look, those words. This wasn't a coincidence. And even though I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sometimes the simplest conversations become more than just an exchange of words. They transform into bridges, leading to what should have remained hidden. With Liam, it was exactly like that. Every time we were alone, our conversations would drag on, and I could feel something growing between us that couldn't be ignored. I was already aware that Liam and I were spending too much time together, more than we should. But every time he appeared, I couldn't resist. It was a strange feeling, as if something inside me had been awakened after a long sleep. I kept telling myself that it was just an innocent friendship, that Liam was simply adding a fresh note to my routine life. But with each passing day, I felt the tension grow, and it became increasingly difficult to deny it. One evening, we were left alone in the living room. David was out meeting friends, and the house felt unusually quiet. "Do you miss your old life?" Liam suddenly asked, breaking the silence. I looked up at him. He was sitting across from me, casually leaning back in his chair. I felt his gaze penetrate deeper than just the surface. "Sometimes," I replied, "but I'm glad I have stability with David. We've been together for so many years. Maybe sometimes I do miss some changes, but that's normal." Liam nodded. His face remained inscrutable, but I sensed that this conversation meant more to him than just a casual chat. Suddenly, he asked a question that threw me off balance. "What would you change in your life if you could?" His words caught me off guard. I hesitated, trying to find the right answer. "That's a tough question," I admitted. "I'm not sure if I would want to change anything at all. Although, maybe, sometimes, I wish for something new. Something that would make me feel alive." As soon as those words left my lips, I realized how candid they were. Liam continued to look at me, but his gaze had changed. It was no longer light and casual. "You deserve more, Catherine," he said quietly. "I see how you light up when you smile. I'd want you to be happy all the time." His words made me feel strangely vulnerable. I looked away, not knowing what to say. Inside, I was growing uneasy. This wasn't just friendly sympathy. Liam spoke as if he saw something more in me. "Liam," I tried to smile to diffuse the situation. "We're just talking too much. Maybe I'm just tired." "Sorry." He shook his head slightly, as if waking up from his thoughts. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "It's okay." I stood up from the couch, feeling the need to change the subject. "I should probably go to bed. I have a lot to do tomorrow." Liam looked at me with a slight smile and nodded. "Of course. Good night, Catherine." I headed to the bedroom, feeling his gaze on my back. My heart was beating faster than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our connection had become much deeper than just sympathy. The next day, when David went out on business, I was left alone with Liam again. We were drinking coffee in the kitchen, and the conversation somehow seamlessly shifted to personal topics. "Have you ever wanted something more?" he unexpectedly asked, looking at me over his coffee cup. His voice was quiet, almost intimate. "What do you mean?" I tried to stay calm, though I already knew where he was going. "Well, I don't know. Sometimes I think that people live as if they're afraid of change. They stay in their comfort zones, but don't experience real emotions. Have you ever felt something like that?" Once again, I felt a slight unease. Liam wasn't just flirting. He was trying to dig deeper, trying to understand my true feelings. "Maybe," I answered cautiously, "but you can't always change your life. Sometimes stability is what you need." "I'm not so sure." He leaned slightly forward. "Sometimes change is what brings us to life." I noticed how his gaze lingered on my eyes, as if studying me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Part of me wanted to step back, but the other part, the one I tried not to think about, was already ready to take a step forward. "I don't know," I sighed, trying to return to reality. "Maybe you're right, but sometimes changes can be too dangerous." Liam smiled and leaned back in his chair. "Only if you're afraid of the consequences." Our conversations continued, growing deeper each day, and I noticed how Liam was starting to occupy more and more space in my thoughts. I could no longer deny that I felt different in his presence. It wasn't just excitement. It was like waking up from a long sleep. But the most frightening part was that I no longer wanted to avoid these conversations. I was drawn to them, like a moth to a flame, knowing that one day it could end badly. Later that same evening, I stood by the window in the bedroom, looking out at the garden. Liam was somewhere downstairs, and I felt my heart beat faster when I thought about him. It was wrong, and I knew it. But despite all my attempts to convince myself that it was just a fleeting crush, my excitement only grew. I realized that this was no longer just conversations. Something was brewing between us, and I couldn't deny it. I never thought that an evening, which started so ordinarily, could change everything. That day, David was late at work, something that had become common lately. Liam suggested watching a movie, and it seemed like an entirely innocent idea. We had done it before, sitting in the living room, discussing films, joking about the characters like old friends. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was the silence in the house, or the fact that we were alone again. As soon as Liam started the movie, I felt an elusive tension in the air. It slowly filled the room, becoming more palpable with every minute. We sat close, and I could feel his proximity. Our knees were almost touching, and although I tried to focus on the screen, my thoughts kept drifting back to how his hand rested on the armrest next to mine. My heart was beating slightly faster than usual, and I couldn't understand why this simple touch affected me so much. At some point, I felt his fingers accidentally brush against my hand. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a spark through my entire body. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't want to. Liam didn't move his hand either, and we sat there, our fingers lightly touching, creating a strange yet delightful tension between us. I glanced at him. Liam was already looking at me. His eyes were deep and penetrating, and there was something in them I couldn't ignore. My breathing became heavy, and it seemed like the air in the room had thickened. "Catherine," his voice was quiet, as if he was afraid to break the fragility of the moment. I didn't reply. The words simply disappeared, and I didn't know what to say at that moment. My body seemed to decide for me. Liam slowly reached for me, and I watched as his hand lifted to gently touch my cheek. When his fingers softly brushed against my skin, I felt a tremor inside me. I should have stopped this. I should have told him that we were going too far. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. At that moment, it felt inevitable. Our faces began to move closer, and it seemed like time slowed down. My thoughts screamed at me to stop, but my heart had already made its decision. Our lips met, and I felt his warmth. That kiss was so unexpected, yet it felt so right. Liam kissed me gently, almost hesitantly, as if he was afraid of going too far. But I didn't resist. I felt a fire ignite inside me, one that I had tried to suppress for so long. This kiss was like a flash, bright, passionate, but at the same time full of danger. For a moment, our lips parted, and I opened my eyes. Liam was looking at me, his breathing heavy, just like mine. We both understood that we had crossed a line, from which there was no return. And despite this, we reached out to each other again. The second kiss was more confident, more passionate. I felt his arms wrap around me, pulling me closer. My hand slid around his neck, and I allowed myself to get lost in the moment, forgetting everything that existed outside these four walls. All that mattered was what was happening right now, between us. But suddenly, reality hit me with such force that it felt like waking up from a dream. I pulled away, breathing heavily, realizing what had just happened. "Liam." I couldn't find the words. Inside me, a storm of emotions was raging, a mixture of guilt, passion, and fear. Liam looked at me, his gaze serious. He also realized that we had crossed a boundary. "Catherine?" His voice was quiet but firm. I didn't want things to go this far, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I didn't say anything in return. All I could do was look at him, feeling everything around us changing. We could no longer go back to what we were before. That kiss had changed everything. I slowly stood up from the couch, feeling my legs turn to jelly. I need time to think," I finally managed to say, barely finding the strength to speak. Liam just nodded, understanding that this moment was too complicated to continue. I left the room, feeling my heart still pounding wildly. We had taken a step that changed our lives forever. And now, before us lay the unknown, which frightened me more than anything else. After that evening, I couldn't look at Liam the same way as before. Every time our paths crossed in the house, I felt a conflict tearing me apart inside. I tried to avoid him, pretending that nothing had happened, but it was all in vain. The kiss, that fleeting moment that changed everything, wouldn't leave me in peace. I tried to behave as usual. I smiled at David during breakfast, discussed our everyday matters with him. But now I felt the weight of guilt, which settled on my heart like a heavy stone. I loved David. He was my support, my protector, and, ultimately, the one I shared my life with. But at the same time, Liam awakened something new in me that I couldn't suppress. One morning, as I was making coffee in the kitchen, I felt Liam enter the room. I didn't turn around, too afraid to meet his eyes, too afraid that these feelings would burst out. "Good morning," he said calmly, but I caught a hidden tension in his voice. "Good morning," I replied briefly, not taking my eyes off the coffee maker. We were silent. I heard him step closer, and that instantly made my heart beat faster. Every time Liam was near, my body seemed to react on its own, disobeying my mind. "Catherine, we can't keep doing this," he finally said, and his voice was tense. "I know you're trying to avoid me, but it's not going to work. We both know what happened." I froze. My fingers, which were holding the cup, trembled slightly, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Inside, everything was screaming, "Stop! Walk away!" But I couldn't. "Liam!" I finally turned to him, meeting his serious gaze. "I can't keep this going. I'm married. This is wrong." He stepped closer to me, and there was so much determination in his eyes that I felt my own resolve weakening. "Catherine," his voice grew softer, but there was fierce conviction in it. "I can't just forget about it. You feel the same way. I can see it. We can't just pretend nothing happened." I looked at him, feeling a storm raging inside me. He was right. I tried to avoid it, but every encounter only intensified my feelings for him. Liam awakened something in me that I had long buried under routine and obligations. "This just can't be," I whispered, trying to find the strength to refuse. We need to forget about it. You're David's nephew, Liam. This is wrong." He took another step towards me, and now there was no distance between us. His hand gently slid to my cheek, just like it did that evening. I felt the warmth of his touch, and once again felt my resistance weakening. "You can't deny it, Catherine," he whispered, his voice almost pleading. "I know you feel it too." I closed my eyes, trying to find the strength to pull away. But the truth was, I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to be close to him, and that feeling was destroying everything I thought I knew about myself. "Liam!" I opened my eyes and looked directly at him. "I don't know what to do. I feel terrible. I love David, but I can't deny what you've awakened in me." His gaze softened, and he gently touched my hair. "I'm not asking you to make a choice right now," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that I'm not going to back down. I can't hide how I feel about you anymore." With those words, Liam stepped back and headed towards the door. I was left standing alone in the kitchen, feeling like my world was falling apart around me. I realized that our life with David would never be the same. Liam had awakened feelings in me that I couldn't control, and even though I fought against it, I knew I was losing. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Liam more and more often. I avoided him, tried not to be alone with him, but that only intensified my desire. It was as if I was drawn to him despite common sense. And although I tried to convince myself that this was just a fleeting passion, the reality was much more complicated. Every time our eyes met, I felt that magnetic pull that was impossible to ignore. Liam was no longer just David's nephew, no longer just a young student living in our house. He had become someone who changed my life. And now, standing before a choice, I felt like I was walking on the edge. I didn't know how much longer I could resist, but I was sure of one thing: sooner or later, I would have to take a step, and that step would change everything. After our last conversation, I thought I could control my feelings. I tried to convince myself that it was just a temporary weakness, that it would soon pass like a summer shower. I promised myself that I could keep my distance, that my relationship with Liam would remain just a strange misunderstanding that could be brushed aside. But the more I tried, the stronger this desire flared up anew. Every morning, when I saw him in the kitchen or the living room, I caught myself waiting for a casual touch. Even his gaze could drive me crazy. Liam was too close, and every time we were alone, the air between us filled with a tension that seemed impossible to dispel. David went away for a few days on business, and I should have felt relieved. But instead, the house filled with silence that only heightened my anxiety. I knew Liam was nearby, and it felt as if the very possibility of being alone with him was weighing on me, making my heart beat faster. The morning when everything changed began like any other. I woke up alone, getting out of bed in anticipation of another day I had to somehow endure. I was still half asleep when I heard quiet footsteps outside the bedroom door. Someone entered the room, and I realized it was Liam. I didn't open my eyes, afraid of what would happen next. His steps were quiet but determined. He came closer to the bed, and I felt my heart stop. I should have stopped him, told him to leave, but my body didn't obey. I was paralyzed by anticipation. "Catherine." His voice sounded quietly, almost in a whisper. He said my name as if it was a secret no one was supposed to know. I opened my eyes and saw him standing by the bed, his gaze serious and full of resolve. My mind told me to leave, to stop this, but I already knew it was impossible. There were no more barriers between us. He slowly leaned down toward me, his breath hot and close. I felt his lips on my cheek, and this touch ignited a fire within me that I could no longer extinguish. I didn't pull away. Instead, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to fully immerse in the moment. "Liam," I finally whispered, touching his neck. "We can't." But my words sounded so weak and unconvincing that even I didn't believe them. We had already crossed the line, and no conversation or promises could change that. He leaned down to me again, his lips gently touching mine, and I got lost in that moment. Everything else disappeared. It was just the two of us, and nothing else mattered. I knew it was wrong. I knew there would be consequences that I would have to face, but at that moment, I could no longer fight. After everything happened, I lay next to Liam, staring at the ceiling. The silence that followed was deafening. We both knew that everything had changed now. I couldn't bring myself to say a word, but the silence was unbearable. "What now?" Liam whispered, breaking the silence. I didn't know what to answer. What now? We had crossed a line we shouldn't have crossed. We let passion take over, and now the consequences of that action were inevitable. "I don't know," I replied quietly, feeling the weight of guilt growing inside me. "We shouldn't have." "But we did." Liam turned to me, his gaze full of determination. "And I don't regret it." I couldn't look at him. My heart was torn to pieces. I loved David, but Liam had become something more to me. I knew this wasn't just a fleeting passion. This was real. But I also knew that now I would have to face the truth and the consequences of what we had done. I got out of bed, trying to find the strength within myself. Liam remained lying down, watching me. "We need to think this through," I said, trying to regain control of the situation. "David mustn't find out about this." Liam nodded, but there was a desperate resolve in his eyes. "I don't want to hide, Catherine. I want to be with you." These words pierced me like a knife. I didn't know how to respond. Our world had been shattered, and I had to decide what my future would be. I knew I had made a terrible mistake, but what was even worse, this mistake didn't seem like something I wanted to undo. On the contrary, everything inside me was screaming that I had done what I wanted most. The weight of this realization hit me with new force when I heard Liam get up from the bed. He walked up behind me and gently embraced me, his arms wrapping around my waist. I closed my eyes, feeling how his touch once again stirred something deep inside me. But with it came guilt. I loved David, and our years together meant a lot to me. But with Liam, I felt something entirely different. It was like an awakening, as if I had been living in a half-sleep until this moment. "How are you?" His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it felt so close that I could hear every breath he took. I don't know," I answered honestly, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Liam, this is too complicated. I love David, but now, I don't know what to do." Liam slowly turned me to face him, and his gaze was full of both pain and determination. "Catherine, I know it's complicated," he said, his voice serious and calm, "but you can't deny what you feel. You're not alone in this. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is fine." His words felt like a sentence. I knew we now had to make a decision, decide how to move forward, but I wasn't ready to lose everything. My marriage with David, our life together, our memories, everything held me captive. I stepped away from Liam, trying to find the right words. My heart was tearing apart, and with each new beat came fresh doubts. "Liam, this is too much. I can't just destroy everything David and I have. He doesn't deserve this. I don't deserve..." Liam stepped closer to me and took my hands. "You deserve to be happy, Catherine," he said, looking into my eyes. "And I'm ready to do anything to make you happy, even if it means we have to change a lot." His words were so sincere that it became hard for me to breathe. I knew he was right. I knew that with him, I felt something that had long disappeared from my marriage with David. But it didn't make the choice any easier. I need to talk to David, I finally said, feeling my strength wane. I can't keep living this lie. But I'm not sure I can leave him. Liam let go of my hands, his face serious. I'm not asking you to do it right now, he said. But sooner or later, you'll have to choose. You can't keep going like this. We can't keep going like this. Those words hurt me deeply. I knew he was right, but I was also afraid of the consequences. What would happen if I left David for Liam? Could I live with that decision? And what if Liam was just a passing fling, and over time all of this would fade away? I spent the rest of the day in agonizing thought. The whole house, every object, every detail reminded me of David. I knew he would be back in a few days, and I would have to decide how to move forward. My world was falling apart, and I would have to piece it back together, but I had no idea what it would look like. The next day, Liam left for the university, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wandered through the house like a shadow, trying to find answers hidden behind a veil of fear and guilt. I tried to imagine the conversation with David, how he would react, how his face would change when he learned the truth. It was unbearable. Late in the evening, I sat in the living room, staring at the phone, unable to bring myself to call Liam. I knew he was waiting for an answer, but I didn't have one. I couldn't force myself to take that step. The passion I felt for him was real, but my feelings for David, those were the foundation of my life. And now I stood at a crossroads, unsure of which way to go. That day, everything was going as usual. Liam came home after his classes, and I suggested we watch a movie together. It was something familiar, something we had done many times before, but this time it felt different. Ever since we crossed that line, our connection had grown stronger, and with each meeting, the tension between us only increased. David was supposed to return in a few days, and I thought we still had time to figure out what was happening. But things unfolded much faster than I could have expected. We sat on the couch, our knees touching, and I felt the air between us filling with an invisible energy. Liam placed his hand on my shoulder, and I didn't pull away. I knew I shouldn't allow this, but at that moment, it all felt right. "Catherine," Liam said softly, his voice full of tenderness. "I can't pretend everything's okay anymore. I want to be with you." I didn't have time to respond because he was already leaning in, and our lips met. It was a kiss full of desire and passion we had suppressed for so long. I closed my eyes, feeling everything inside me tremble, and for a moment, everything around us disappeared. The house, David, all our obligations. There was only this passion that seemed to consume us completely. But suddenly, I heard a sound. The front door burst open, and David walked into the room. My heart stopped. Liam and I pulled away from each other, but it was too late. "What is going on?" David stormed into the room, his eyes filled with rage and pain when he saw us together. I froze, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Liam tensed but didn't retreat, his hand still resting on my shoulder. "David," I whispered, unable to find the words to explain what was happening. But David already knew, his face contorted in pain, and that pain quickly turned to fury. He stepped forward, and I saw his fists clench. "You two!" His voice shook with anger. "You both betrayed me." "It's not what you think," Liam tried to intervene, but David had already snapped. "Shut up!" he yelled, his voice brimming with fury. "You're my nephew! How could you? How could you do this to me?" Before Liam could say anything, David lunged at him. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to react. David shoved Liam, and he stumbled back, hitting the wall. I screamed, trying to stop them, but at that moment, Liam retaliated, pushing David away. "Stop it!" I cried, but they couldn't hear me anymore. David lunged at Liam again, and now they were grappling, throwing punches at each other. The air was thick with tension, broken only by the sounds of their fight. I stood in shock, unable to believe what I was seeing. My entire life was falling apart right in front of me, and I was powerless to change anything. Liam tried to defend himself, but David was furious. His punches were fast and brutal, as if he wasn't just trying to win, but to destroy him. "How could you?" David shouted, his voice full of rage. "She's my wife!" Liam finally pushed David away and stood up, breathing heavily. Blood was running down his face, but he was still standing. "I love her," he said quietly, but his words felt like a knife to David's heart. "Love her?" David laughed, but there was no joy in his laugh. "You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed us." I stood there, feeling tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was watch as the two most important people in my life tore each other apart. "David," I finally said, but he didn't even look at me. "No, Catherine." His voice was cold and sharp. "You're just as guilty. You chose him. You betrayed me." With those words, David turned and left, slamming the door so hard that the house shook. I stood there, unable to move. Liam slowly approached me, his face full of pain. "Catherine," he said softly, touching my hand. "I'm sorry." But his words didn't mean anything anymore. Everything was destroyed. The day after David left, I spent the entire day in a state of shock. I couldn't summon the strength to think, feel, or even move. The home that once felt so cozy and safe had now become a place of pain and destruction. Every room was a reminder of what I had done. I felt the weight of reality pressing down on me, but I couldn't handle it. Liam was there. He tried to talk to me, to comfort me, but his words couldn't heal the wound I had inflicted on myself. All my thoughts were focused on David. I knew I had shattered not only his trust, but also the life we had built together over the years. Late in the evening, I heard the sound of a key in the lock. David had returned. But this time, there was no softness or love in his movements. He entered the house with a determined look, as if he had already made up his mind, and I immediately knew that this conversation would change everything. "David!" I tried to speak, but he abruptly raised his hand, silencing me. "Don't, Catherine." His voice was cold, and there was no warmth left in his eyes. "I've made my decision. We're getting a divorce." Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I had known this was possible, but hearing him say it out loud made reality come crashing down with renewed force. "David, please, wait." I took a step forward, trying to reach him, but he looked at me with icy indifference. "No, please, Catherine." His voice grew even colder. "You betrayed me, and I can't live with that. I'm not going to stay with a woman who did this to me." I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "I don't know how it happened. Please, give me a chance to explain." "Explain?" He scoffed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "Do you think that after everything I saw, I want your explanations?" He looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if all the years we had spent together no longer mattered. "It hurts," he continued, his voice filled with disappointment. "I've lost not just a wife, but also a nephew. How could you, Catherine? How could you destroy everything we had?" I didn't know what to say. Every word from him was like a knife to my heart. I felt as if my actions had not only destroyed our family, but also shattered his faith in me. "I want you out of my house," he finally said, his voice firm. "You and Liam, take your things and leave. I don't want to see either of you here anymore." Those words hung in the air, and I felt the world collapsing around me. David turned away, as if he couldn't bear to look at me anymore, and headed toward the door. I stood frozen, unable to move. "I'll file for divorce tomorrow," he added, before walking out. When the door slammed shut behind him, I was left alone in the emptiness. Liam tried to hug me, but I pulled away. It felt as though I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and all my strength was focused on not falling into it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but I didn't know who those words were meant for. Liam, David, or myself. My life had crumbled into pieces, and I couldn't fix it. I sat down on the floor, tears streaming down my cheeks, as a wave of regret washed over me. I thought about how things could have been different if I had stopped in time, if I hadn't allowed my feelings for Liam to destroy everything. But now, it was too late. Liam was near, but I began to notice something strange in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, which had perhaps been building in his soul since everything began. We no longer spoke about the future. Silence hung between us, growing thicker with each passing day. Liam was still there, but I felt his thoughts were already far away. He looked lost, and that lostness filled our conversations, and every one of his movements. One evening, as we sat at the table in the living room, I decided to ask the question that had been tormenting me for a long time. "Liam!" I looked at him, trying to find the courage within myself. "What happens next?" He raised his eyes to me, and in his gaze, I saw the reflection of what I had long understood. He wasn't ready. "I don't know," he replied quietly, lowering his gaze to his hands. I didn't think it would go this far." His words hurt me deeply, though I had already known how he felt. Liam had started to realize that the destruction we had left behind was far more serious than he could have imagined. He had lost touch with his family, and now everything he held dear was at stake. "Do you regret it?" I couldn't hold back the question. I needed to hear his answer. He stayed silent for a long time, and I could see him wrestling with himself. Finally, he looked up and said, "Catherine, I can't lose my family for us. I didn't think it would lead to this. I never wanted to destroy my life. I'm not ready for this." His words hung in the air like a heavy burden, and I felt something inside me break. I knew Liam felt something for me, but his fear of losing his family outweighed everything. I couldn't blame him. I didn't even know what I had expected from this relationship. "So, you're leaving me?" I asked quietly, realizing that this was the end. Liam nodded slowly, his face full of pain. "I can't go on, Catherine." His voice was soft, almost broken. "I can't destroy everything for what we had. It was too much." I couldn't listen to his words any longer. All this time, I had tried to justify our actions, hoping that this passion and connection between us were worth everything we had lost. But in that moment, I realized I was wrong. Liam wasn't ready to make such sacrifices for me, and I understood that everything we had built was an illusion. "All right," I finally said, trying to hold back the tears. "I understand." He rose from his seat, came over to me, and gently took my hand, whispering, "I never wanted it to end like this. Forgive me." His words no longer mattered. He had already made his decision, and I was left alone, as I should have been from the very beginning. Liam walked away, and I stood there, staring at the empty room that was once full of life. Now, I was left with the wreckage of my life, and I had to face the consequences of my actions. After Liam left, the world around me became completely different, gray, bleak, and empty. I was left alone amidst the ruins of my life, and every moment spent in solitude was filled with the bitterness of regret. I sat in the empty house that was once a place where I felt safe and comfortable, but now it seemed like a prison built by my own hands. The pain I felt wasn't just physical, it penetrated every corner of my soul. My mind was filled with memories that now seemed distant and unreal. I remembered moments when everything was still normal, when my marriage with David was strong and secure, when Liam was not yet a part of my world. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I had destroyed everything for the sake of fleeting passion. Each morning, I woke up with a heavy sense of emptiness. I no longer knew how to live. The whole world I had spent so long building had vanished. David no longer wanted anything to do with me, and Liam, despite all our feelings, had left me, abandoning me with my mistakes. I had lost both my husband and the passion that had drawn me in so strongly. I tried to distract myself, to find any activity that could help me forget, but it was all in vain. Every corner of this house reminded me of what I had done. Every place, from the kitchen to the bedroom, was filled with memories that now brought only pain. I couldn't escape my mistakes. I couldn't escape from myself. Sometimes I would look at myself in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back at me. I saw a woman, exhausted and empty, a woman who had destroyed everything she had for the sake of fleeting passion. Liam had awakened something in me that I couldn't control, but now it didn't matter. I realized I had lost far more than I could ever have imagined. Loneliness became my constant companion. I would sit for hours in silence, not knowing what to do next. It seemed as if life no longer had meaning. All my dreams, plans, and hopes had vanished. Time and again, I tried to understand how I had ended up here. How had I allowed myself to destroy everything for something so fleeting? At night, I often couldn't sleep. I would toss and turn in bed, remembering how David and I once shared it. Now it felt too big and cold. I could hear the echoes of our conversations, our laughter. I could feel his touch, but it was all just in my head. Reality was completely different. I was alone. I knew that no one could return to me what I had lost. David was right. I had betrayed him, and that betrayal was too great to be forgiven. I had shattered the trust that had been built over years, had destroyed our relationship for a passion that now seemed so illusory. Liam had also left, unwilling to fight for us, and that only deepened my sense of loss. Each day brought a new wave of pain. I felt regret choking me, draining the last bit of strength I had. My life seemed meaningless, and I didn't know how to piece it back together. Only darkness lay ahead, and I couldn't see a way out. I often thought about what I could have done differently. If I had stopped myself back then, if I hadn't allowed myself to give in to temptation, everything would be different. My family would still be whole. But now, those were just dreams. Dreams of something that could never be undone. Every day spent in solitude became a new reminder of how easily everything that once seemed unshakable could be destroyed. The pain I felt was not just the result of betrayal, but the realization that I had destroyed not only my own life, but also the lives of those dear to me. David would never return, and even if I tried to fix my mistakes, the past could never be restored. I stood amidst the ruins I had created myself. One of the hardest aspects of my new existence was the understanding that I had been stripped of what I had long considered the foundation of my life: stability. Once, I was sure of my future, confident that David and I would get through any difficulties. Our shared dreams of family, our travels together, long conversations over dinner, all of that had become so familiar to me that I took it for granted. But now, when none of that remained, I felt as though my life had shattered into pieces, and I could no longer put them back together. I often sat on the couch, staring at the empty walls that were once adorned with our photographs. They captured moments of happiness, but now they were useless reminders of what I had lost. The house, once filled with laughter and joy, had now become just a shell in which I drowned in my thoughts and regrets. Sometimes I asked myself, why did I let this happen? After all, I had everything I needed to be happy: a loving husband, a home, a stable life. But Liam appeared, and like a whirlwind, he turned everything upside down. At that moment, I couldn't see the consequences ahead. I wasn't thinking about the future. My life with David seemed predictable and devoid of the emotions Liam had awakened in me. I was like a moth drawn to the light, unaware that it was the light of a flame that would eventually consume me. Every morning, I woke up with a heavy sense of guilt. That guilt stayed with me throughout the day, reminding me that I had betrayed not only David, but also myself. I had destroyed my marriage for the illusion of happiness, for a fleeting passion that evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. Liam left, abandoning me with shattered dreams and the wreckage of my life. He wasn't ready to sacrifice everything for me, and that realization only deepened my suffering. I was ready to fight for our feelings, but in the end, I was left alone because our dreams couldn't withstand the test of reality. Loneliness became my everyday reality. Friends drifted away, and I could no longer look them in the eyes. Everyone knew what had happened, and the judgment hung in the air, even if no one spoke it aloud. I felt like a stranger in my own world. It seemed like I no longer belonged to anyone or anything. The hardest part was knowing that I had destroyed my own life. I couldn't blame David for leaving. I couldn't blame Liam for choosing his family. Everything that happened was the result of my own decisions. I had allowed myself to follow a path that seemed enticing, but ultimately led to destruction. Sometimes I tried to recall when everything started to go wrong. Was it the moment Liam walked into our home? Or the first time I allowed myself to think about how I felt about him? Or perhaps it began even earlier, when I stopped feeling alive next to David. But none of these questions mattered anymore. It was all in the past. The feeling of emptiness became a part of my life. I no longer saw any meaning in the future, no longer knew how to go on. Every minute spent in solitude reminded me of what I had lost. All that remained were regrets. Regrets that I had allowed myself to destroy what was most precious to me. Now I understood that true happiness had been in what I had with David. We could have gotten through the challenges, could have overcome the routine, if only I hadn't allowed myself to be swayed by temptation. But now that was just a dream. A dream of what could have been if I had made a different choice. With each passing day, the pain became less sharp, but the emptiness remained. It had firmly settled inside me, and I knew I would never again be the person I once was. I learned to live with that feeling, but I could no longer believe in love and happiness the way I once did. Now I was alone, and that loneliness was the result of my own choices. If I could go back, I would stop myself. I wouldn't allow passion to overtake reason, wouldn't let fleeting feelings destroy what I had spent years building. My mistake was in believing that I could build something new by destroying the old. But that's not true. I destroyed my life, and now there is no turning back. I tell you this, don't repeat my mistakes. Don't follow the allure of something that seems tempting, but could ultimately destroy you. Don't risk what's dear to you for fleeting pleasures. Passion fades, but the consequences remain forever. And one day, like me, you may find yourself alone, with an emptiness inside and regrets you can never escape.